Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to Live Learning this afternoon, where we get to nerd out on my favorite topic. I know you thought you were here for a 45-minute session, but I am notorious for talking over on this topic. So go and get yourself a hot cup of tea, a coffee, a cold beverage, whatever you need to settle in as we nerd out on all things capabilities. To kick off, I just want to take some time to acknowledge the traditional owners on the land in which we live, work, play, learn, and create. Future Anything is headquartered in Meanjin in Brisbane on Yagara and Turrbal land. And it's really important that we acknowledge that we are on the land of the longest, oldest continuing culture on this planet, and how privileged we are to continue, I think, what started with our First Nations people around learning and innovation in the work that we do at Future Anything. But we have some eager humans in the room. I'd love for you to just introduce yourself. Drop into the chat. Who are you? Where are you coming to us from? What school, potentially, are you from? Tell us a little bit about you and what lands you're joining us from. And let's sort of get a little bit of a lay of the land. I've got my wonderful colleague, Dan, with me, who is Director of Professional Learning at Future Anything. Also got Alice in the room. And the team are going to be, managing the chat and probably managing my time, gently reminding me when I talk for too long. And so if you've got any questions, do please feel very free to put them in the chat. Introduce yourself, say good day, ask a curly question. And I'd love for you, if you're here for a specific reason, you've got a specific question, I would welcome those questions in the chat as well, because I think it'll help us shape the conversation that we're having today. We're also joined by some pretty awesome educators that we have the privilege of working with at Future Anything. We've got Donna Harvey and also Margaret Rhodes. And I'm going to cue them in a little bit to talk a little bit about who they are and their experience building capabilities across their schools and also networks of schools, which I think is super fascinating when we look at how we scale this work across regions as well. Everyone's being super shy, though. Get in the chat. Come on, we're not here for a one-way conversation. Thank you, Hayley. Love a tribute who jumps in first. Introduce yourself, put a curly question in. We like to keep this dynamic. If we're going to all hang out together after school for an afternoon, let's make it worth our while. Now, you'll notice that we're recording this because we have, I think, 190 people that registered for today's session. Popular topic. And for everybody that's frantically trying to get out of school right now and would like to catch up on this, we'll send out the recording afterwards. So it might be that maybe you're joining us now and you're just desperate to rehear all of this content all over again this afternoon, in which case you will be able to when we send out the recording. My name's Nick Dyson. I'm the CEO and founder of Future Anything. And, over the past 5 years, we've had the great privilege of working across hundreds and hundreds of schools. Each year we work with about 150 schools across Australia and New Zealand. And what we are trying to do in our work with schools and systems is to unleash passion, potential, and agency. My favorite thing is seeing young people do things that they didn't think they could do. And now running a relatively large organisation scaling across Australia, I love seeing schools and systems do things that they didn't think they could do. My favorite thing is when a leader says, oh, we couldn't possibly do that here. And I sort of see that as game on to try and see how we can address that challenge and do something maybe a little bit interesting that makes learning better for young people and more joyful for educators. Because I think when we build the fun in to learning and educators have fun, then young people have fun. And when young people have fun and teachers have fun, learning is really magical. And that's the work that we want to do in our schools. Today, we're going to nerd out on all things capabilities, which, as I said, is definitely my favorite topic. And because, I really love to talk on this, I've prepared some slides for us, but I'm also notorious for having about 16 different slide decks open. So we could change direction on a moment's notice, depending on the questions that filled in. So what I'm going to do is share screen, and Dan's going to tell me if I muck this up, because there is every intention of this not going well. I'm going to share it like this, which means you can see sort of the slides on the side. Dan, how am I going so far? That's okay. I think we'll do that for now because then I can scroll down. I want to start with a little Simon Sinek process. We're going to go why, what, how as I talk through this. So when we're talking about capabilities, I think the first thing that we have to do is think about why should we talk about capabilities? And I'd love, if you're an educator or a school leader, for you to think about how you introduce change initiatives to your school in this same fashion as well. Because when we have our educators buy into the why, it's way better to get them to buy into the what and then to get around the how. And so that's kind of the process we're going to follow through today. If you are a bit of a research nerd, you would have seen the biannual report that came out from the World Economic Forum this year. And this report kind of unpacks the trends that we're seeing in skills and how these transfer to industry. What's cool is they'll talk about the core skills for now, and then they kind of project in the next 5 years what they think is going to be critical for industry moving forward. And as you can see from this slide, there is some transfer from 25 to 2030, but with this like rapid age of technology adoption, we're seeing significant shifts in the skills that young people need when they navigate life after school. I mean, the top three, AI and big data, network and cybersecurity, technological literacy, are very heavy tech-based. However, we have this continuum of these kind of soft skills, 21st century skills, future capabilities, employability skills, 4Cs, 6Cs, enterprise skills. Have I missed? Have any? General capabilities, like whatever we want to call them today, these 21st century skills, and they're feeding through from 25 into 30. If you haven't seen this little snapshot here, it is my favorite graphic to show educators, mainly because when I'm working in rooms full of teachers, I can work out where the maths teachers are straight away because they get a little bit up in arms. As an English teacher, I also have a moment of golf every time I look at this graphic. But this is just another graphic that captures, those core skills in 2030 in the top right-hand corner. What I would love for you to kind of zoom in on, let me do it for you. Look at me go. Is this quadrant here, which is the out of focus skills. Now, remembering that it's quadrants, so closer to the right takes you closer to steady skills and closer to the top takes you to emerging skills. But this is kind of the skill set that we're seeing technology replace, particularly with the rapid adoption of things like AI and AI sitting in almost everything that we do. And so the provocation that I want to throw to you first is if we look at this here, core skills in 2030, emerging skills, out of focus skills, and steady skills, based on this report by the World Economic Forum, I'd love to ask, is the work that you're doing aligning with what this research is telling us? So I'm curious, how much of your teaching time is spent focusing on skills and capabilities? If 100% is every minute I am jamming on about skills and capabilities and 0% is skills what? How much of your teaching are you spending talking about skills and capabilities? And my second question to that is, are you focusing on the right ones? So if you could just drop into the chat, what percentage of your time are you spending talking about skills and capabilities in the classroom? And are you talking about the right ones? I'll give you kind of 60 seconds to feed something in here. And I've even got the chat open. Look at me go. Fun fact, Dan is like a Simon Sinek fiend. So the fact that I opened with Simon Sinek made him very happy. He didn't even have to go hunting for the Simon Sinek link. He would have had it bookmarked on the front of his page. Good to see some familiar faces. I'm looking for some percentages. We're going to make this interactive. Participatory. You can't be a casual observer in this conversation. Sorry, not sorry. Drop those percentages in here. As you drop them in, I just want to talk about, like, this is a mantra that we kind of use to kind of unpack the trends with young people today. It's not really about what this generation know. It's what they can do with what they know that will matter. And so we're seeing this transition from sort of a knowledge economy to a skills economy. And what we would talk is a move from a content-rich curriculum to a capability-rich curriculum. And we've been obsessed with this for a period of time. This was kind of our first capability framework. And so when we started working in entrepreneurship in schools, I was obsessed with what made a young person successful in enterprise. Like, I was working with large groups of young people, and some young people, irrespective of the resourcing that they had access to, they could just make things happen. Okay. They had this agility, adaptability, this, creative energy, and that they could use as a force for good in entrepreneurship. And I started to unpick, well, what were the skills and capabilities that made that happen? And so these were the first 6 capabilities that we focused on 5 years ago in our research. And through our flagship program, Activate, we started benchmarking young people on these capabilities at the beginning of the program. Okay, so asking them questions to test their confidence in these capabilities. And then we started using post-program surveys to see whether there was a confidence change through that 10-week engagement in curriculum. So the question was, how did they feel about these capabilities at the beginning and whether they could do them? Then we would take them through a 10-week entrepreneurial journey, and then we would test them at the end and go, well, how confident are you now? And we started seeing some trends in that work. Activate this year has about 9,000 young people across 90 school contexts, extending from year 3 all the way through to year 12. 54% of our public schools and 1 in 3 of our schools are regional schools. So it's a giant cross-section of education that we were kind of benchmarking through this work. And there were a couple of things that we noticed. Firstly, creativity and innovation were 2 very different skills, in fact. And what we also noticed was that curiosity wasn't in our capabilities, but we started identifying it as this critical linchpin for engagement. And so what I started feeling was curiosity was the starting point, and then curiosity could evolve into creativity. And then once you had lots of ideas, you could make an innovative choice. And so innovation was the other side of it. And then entrepreneurship was the other side of innovation, because it was the commercialization of an innovative, creative idea that had come from curiosity about a problem. So that was the kind of first journey we unpicked within the 2 years. You'll notice we used project management instead of collaboration, because this is about making stuff happen with or without other people. But, when you were working with people doing it well. Adaptive mindset, which was based around the research around adaptability quotient. So, how do you bounce back from resilience and feedback and failure? And we could see that this was super important, particularly with the wellbeing epidemic, and then communication and critical thinking. After running these sorts of tools for 2 years, we then introduced this next set of capabilities. We brought curiosity in because we knew it was really important. We pulled innovation off creativity and threw it in problem solving. So then we were making sort of discerning problem solving, kept the other 4, and kind of moved forward for another 2 years of this work. And then what we did last year is we dug into this massive research piece where we looked at officially 19 frameworks, but as many as 30 different capability frameworks to unpick. They're very pretty, lots of colors, circles, cycles, very inspiring graphics. But really what we did is kind of distill all these frameworks down to work out what were the common capabilities that sat underneath these really big research-backed frameworks. Could we distill them into the common capabilities that sat across them? Then we unpicked all the research around the future of work, and then we tried to look across them to work out what was education telling us, what was important, what is industry telling us what is important, and does this match the capabilities that we were actually studying? Then we looked at the definitions of the capabilities and went back to basics with research and kind of pulled a new capability framework together that was research-backed and best practice off this 9-month journey where we looked at different frameworks and analysed them. And so a couple of months ago, we released our new 2025 Future Anything Capability Framework. There's a QR code on the screen, or Dan Legend has dropped a handy link to the blog that kind of unpacks this in a little bit more detail. But what we realised through 4 years of research and working with schools and systems and young people, and also this 6 to 9 month period that we went through, really validating the tools that we were using, we believe that curiosity is the linchpin of engagement. If young people don't care enough to ask a question, they don't care. Moving from there, we look at critical thinking and creative thinking being opposite sides of the same coin. You need creative thinking and a possibility mindset to look at everything that could be relevant, and then you need critical thinking to make choices. Then we had communication, action, so project management adapted into action, and then adaptive mindset evolved into agility, which was being persistent, adaptive, and resilient. Problem solving fell off because when we dug into the research, we realized that problem solving was a product of these capabilities, not necessarily a capability itself. And in building this framework, there were a couple of really critical things that were important. The first thing was it needed to be clean and easy for schools to read. So it was 6 capabilities or less. That was the first thing, because we knew if we built this huge platform with lots of different capabilities and skills, it would be too complex to embed within the busyness of schools. So that was number one. Needed to be usable and actionable for even for a small regional school with little resourcing. Okay, how do we make this super agile and usable for schools? The other thing was the skills that we chose, the capabilities that we chose, had to be transferable and not context specific. So even though in a lot of these frameworks, things like ethical decision making came up, or empathy or digital literacy, which I agree are super critical capabilities, many of them were so context specific that I couldn't put my hand on my heart and say that you could teach this in math just as much as you could teach it in English or religious education or science or humanities or PE or the arts. And so the six that we settled on had to be transferable. The other thing was each of the capabilities then got unpicked so that we had these competencies that sat underneath them, and they needed to be measurable. A young person needed to be able to read what the definition of the capability was, look at the definition of the competency, and identify how they were using that in a mainstream classroom situation. So that needed to be measurable, recognizable in a classroom environment, and student led in that identity. And so we started to build these definitions and then these competencies that sat underneath the capabilities, which you can start to see here. And so, creative thinking, definitely all of these definitions and icons exist in that blog article that Dan. So if you're frantically taking screen grabs, don't panic. We've made them all available within that resource as well. Communication and action, similarly, and then moving to agility. And so in doing this work, what we wanted to create was something that was digestible for any school, usable for both primary and secondary contexts, with skills that were transferable within any classroom context, particularly some of our more constrained core classrooms. And then we wanted to build underneath it an implementation framework that made it fast and easy for schools to build into curriculum. I guess the reality of this is when I was starting to talk about capabilities 5 years ago, I really had to convince school leaders that they mattered. The great thing is we've made steps since that point, and most school and system leaders recognize that capabilities are important. The challenge is, what do we do when we know it matters? Okay. And so this is kind of the place within the system I think we're at the moment. And so what we teach and talk and work with our partners schools, and there's a handful of schools that we work with across multi-year projects to embed this capability framework in a whole school approach, is that once you've got the why, so why are we talking about capabilities and why are we not just focusing on content? The next thing as a school is to have the what. Now, there's lots of capability frameworks out there, and I would say to schools and systems, I love ours, but I'm biased, right? I built it, so of course I'm going to love it. The important thing to prepare young people for the future of work within education is that schools have a capability framework, and that capability framework has working definitions that make sense, identified competencies or sub-skills, and measurement and evaluation instruments for staff and students that are usable for staff and students. Okay, so that's the what, the capability framework. Where this gets really interesting, and I think we're working with systems and schools where we're starting to see this, schools have it. It's not enough just to have the why and the what. You need to have the how. And this is the piece that's really challenging for schools, is once you've got a really robust capability framework that you feel like is acceptable for your school, do you have an implementation framework? Okay, so how this will be implemented within curriculum and classrooms in your school. And then to support that, do you have a professional learning and capacity building plan? So do you have the supports in place for your staff to understand how to do this and then to action it within classrooms? Because what's interesting in our data collection is the confidence of young people in these capabilities is often mirrored by their teachers. So if teachers lack confidence in teaching these capabilities, you can almost guarantee that young people will lack confidence to do these things. Because as teachers, we don't like to teach things we're not good at. Okay, so we tend to kind of gravitate towards the places that we feel comfortable. So I want to throw you another question. Like, where are you at and where is your school at in your capability journey? And so I'd love for you to think about, if you're a 0, you're like, capability what? I don't know how I signed up to this. I'm not sure how it got into my calendar or what we're talking about, but I'm excited to be here. Maybe a 3 is we reference capabilities, but maybe it's just like about compliance on a unit plan. It doesn't actually make its way into teaching and learning. A 5 is we have a whole school capability framework, but it's maybe only working in pockets of our school. 7 is we have a whole school approach, but we aren't really measuring yet, and it's still teacher driven. This is important, okay? Because the philosophy of our work is, if this is about building young people's confidence and competence, it has to be student led, not teacher led, because teachers are time poor. So if this is reliant on teachers assessing, monitoring, marking, then how is it sustainable amongst the complexities of all the other evaluation and reporting cycles that we have as educators? And a 10 is step aside, Nick, I could actually run this session. So drop it in the chat. What have you got? Are you a 0, capability what? Or am I stepping aside for somebody to actually lead this session? Don't be shy now. Good to see some numbers coming through. Cool. Yeah, Natasha, it's tricky in secondary, and it's great. I think PYP schools, if you've got like the IB learner profile, that often works in junior schools as building literacy for this as well. Keep those numbers coming in as we're working through. Cool. Can everyone still hear me? Okay, cool. Just checking. All right. So keep those numbers floating in. And I want to kind of dig into the how really quickly. So we talked about the capability framework, which is the what. Now we're going to talk about the how. This is our implementation framework. So it's 5 steps. And so once you've got a capability framework, even if it's ours or it's not ours, these are the 5 steps to building capabilities within the classroom. The first step is define. And so if you're doing capability work in your classroom, the first thing that you have to do with young people in your learning environment is define the capability with them and use examples and non-examples to allow them to see where they fit on the spectrum of that capability. So we like to show, videos from the office of like collaboration going horribly wrong as a non-exemplar. And then we might show other examples from pop culture to demonstrate the capability going well. And the idea is that young people can kind of work out on this continuum of capability how they fit in. Really critical that the exemplars that you show are not necessarily school-based examples, because it makes it a little bit safer for young people to kind of place themselves on that continuum. Once you've given them the definition, provided some examples and non-examples, it's really important that you give them something active to do with the definition. We've seen schools do like these, but also some really fun things like, capability challenges or wall charts or mascot generation or mimes or games or challenges or presentations on assembly or just things that take the learning and then make it real for the young person in the classroom. The next thing after that is we benchmark the capability because we value what we measure and we measure what we value. And so one of the things that's maybe held back some of this work in schools is not having instruments to show how the development is going within a school context. The other thing is young people can't grow what they can't measure. If they don't see where they fit on the continuum, how can they truly take ownership of the work that they're doing in classrooms? Because what I want to draw your attention to is this little column at the top which says agency. Our belief that agency is the product of confidence in these capabilities. So if you can focus on building young people who are, curious thinkers, creative thinkers, critical thinkers, good communicators, can take action and are agile and responsive in the face of challenge, the product of that is agency. Now, we cannot talk about agency if our tools and systems and frameworks are reliant on teachers. So if it's teacher-driven, we're not being agency-driven in our work with young people. And that's something that's really important to kind of talk about. So we have a series of tools that we've developed that actually measure the confidence of young people in these capabilities. And we focus on student confidence because whether they can or they can't, that's what matters. And so the difficult thing in a typical classroom context is if I'm working with 28 or 30 young people, if my role within the delivery or the implementation of my capability framework is actually to mark or measure young people, it is physically impossible for me as a classroom teacher in a mainstream environment for me to observe all of the behaviours or capture all of the behaviours of young people to measure capabilities confidently. Because whilst I'm watching Sally do some amazing communication over here, I'm missing Clayton do some really good critical thinking over here. Whereas if young people are responsible for capturing and measuring their own capabilities, then they can actually drive that learning forward in a process or in a way that actually really centers around student agency and their learning. And what this looks like is a series of questions where young people are asked if they understand what the capability is. And then we have questions underneath each of the competencies that they report on, everything from, I don't know what this is yet, through to, I can do this so well I could teach others. What we often find in quite well-resourced, privileged private schools is that the students self-report really high in benchmark reports. They're like, I know how to ace this test. I'm going to answer the top one for all of the responses because it'll make me look good. And so what we actually do is then in the post-program report, sometimes we see a data drop, and that's really helpful because we have a much more relative understanding of what young people's confidence is. So then we can start to build these profiles, okay, where we can see the top line is, do you understand what this is? And the second line is your confidence to do it. So this was some benchmark data from this year's Activate cohort aggregated across confidence in these capabilities. Definitely agility is one of the ones that our young people struggle with, as is creative thinking. We're also in the process of building a learner profile because our reports are aggregated for schools, but we're in the process of building a learner profile that will enable young people to jump in, build an avatar, and actually see a dashboard that will have their capabilities as superpowers, and they'll be able to do these activities to build the capabilities up. And this will be student facing. So after we have this data capture of where our young people are at, the critical next step is to practice. And this is the bit where a lot of schools kind of get wrong. We don't provide safe space for young people to practice the capabilities before they have to perform them under assessment conditions. Critical thing is if you're doing the benchmarking, like with our schools that are using our tools, you can take these benchmarking data, you can isolate needy sub-skills, okay, and then really drill in on the capabilities or the parts of the capabilities that need to be built. Now, the thing is, capabilities are developed with fast, frequent, and fun practice. Frequent, once a week. Fun, the more you distance yourself from curriculum and put young people within scenarios where they feel safe, the more they will stretch at their growth edges and actually play with the boundaries of their confidence. Now, when I say fast, I mean 10 minutes a week. I'm not talking about derailing your curriculum. I'm talking about 10 to 15 minute activity a week that's focused on building a target capability, starting with really fun, simple examples, and then building up the complexity of the capability activity as young people build safety. Because what we know is when we build success with young people, they get motivated. When they're motivated, they're engaged. When they're engaged, they get agency. We don't have young people with agency if they don't experience success in the classroom. Now, how do we build these activities? We use our friend ChatGPT and we give them a context, hey, Ima, and ask, I want to build this capability, and then parameters. Can you provide for me 10 activities? And then each week we insert 10 to 15 minute activity in order to build that target capability over 10 weeks. And then what we can start to do is build these really fun toolkits for our schools. And this is some of the work that we do with schools, where then entire teams have agility toolkits that they can roll out in their classrooms. Last couple of steps in the implementation framework is performance and reflection. So young people need to see the capability reflected within their assessment. And then you need to revisit, okay, those benchmark tools to see growth. On average, in our Activate program, this is last year's data because we're rolling out new tools this year, but this is the aggregated report from last year's Activate cohort. And we tend to see, curiosity aside, across the other capabilities, we tend to see growth of 5 to 8% per 10-week intervention when we do these targeted weekly activities for 10 to 15 minutes a week. But the reality is we can't transfer learning without reflection. So giving students an opportunity to build, say, capability profiles, you know, maybe they choose a target capability, and some of our schools then young people collect evidence of how that capability has gone over the 10 weeks. And instead of having assessment showcases, they have capability showcases where they talk about what went well, what didn't go so well, what they do differently, and why that capability matters. But the reality is in this work, what we really have to do is step back to enable our young people to step up through the capability development. Because if we truly want this to be student-driven and agency-led, then it can't be teacher-led. So capability framework, implementation framework, a whole bunch of slides which we'll make available. Feel free to drop your questions in the chat, but I'd really love to elevate Margaret and Donna into the conversation to talk a little bit about the work that they're leading in their schools. Margaret, I might start with you. I was saying before how fun it was to come and work with your young people at the beginning of the year. But I'd love to understand, you're in South Australia, which is, I think, you know, from a system level at the forefront of leading this work across South Australia. But you're also a small, like, regional school who's juggling across a primary context and a secondary context. What does this work look like for you? And what are some of the steps that you're taking to build capability-rich curriculum at Ardrossan?
Yeah, so thanks, Nick. And I think it was really exciting when you did come to our Jocelyn. We're 150 k's from Adelaide. We are a small school, so reception to year 12 with 150 kids. We're on the beautiful lands of the Narungga people on Yorke Peninsula. So we've had a journey over the last 7 years of looking at the why of what we're doing and our purpose and our vision. And it's all around the capabilities for the future. So lots of work around, our pathways for our secondary kids and where they're heading and what they need. So lots of conversations with industry partners and that, but also working with our kindergarten. So the kids coming in and how we build on those skills they've already got and how we develop those. So we've had a big focus on that inquiry learning, we call it for a start. So we have investigations in our junior primary. We had Shark Tank at year 10, but we had some gaps in the middle. So we've worked really hard on our 7 to 9 program, which does have a focus on capabilities now, and running the Activate program at year 3 to 6, which has been really successful. So I think the biggest thing is around changing teacher pedagogy. So, which was really great when you came over, Nick, and delivered that professional learning, because the staff are really keen to develop the capabilities, but it was that, like you said, that clear, easy to read framework, because we've done some work with other frameworks which were quite complex, but the working with the your framework, the Future Anything framework, it's really given the staff the clear bit. This is what we're explicitly teaching, and then building it into the units of work. So it's a really exciting place at the moment. So after our professional learning at the beginning of the year, we've got teachers talking about the inciting incidents that they're kicking off their units of work with. We've got kids talking about how they're developing their capabilities. Our big focus this year is curiosity, and we're just focusing on curiosity as that really key driver for the work. And like I said, we've got teachers who are excited about what they're teaching again. And I think, like you mentioned earlier, in South Australia, we do have almost like the permission to be able to do some of that work now, because the strategy for public education has those 4 key areas of impact. We're focusing on effective learners, which fits beautifully with the capabilities. And obviously the new South Australian curriculum, which is the focus on capabilities and dispositions. So for us, it was sort of like the piece of the puzzle coming together over the last 7 years, or the work we've been doing. And now, like I said, that part with the department now saying, here's your chance to innovate, be really creative. So what we're seeing is it's not across the whole school. Like, we're not a big school, but we've got some champions of the work, and we're really building out across everybody. So it's just an exciting time, I think, to be in education. And, we're pretty proud of the work that we're doing, and it's great to see that impact.
Yeah, I think what's really cool, Margaret, is the work that you're doing across the school context. As a leader, you've taken a real staged approach to the implementation, because one of the, I think, challenges with any change initiative is that we kind of do one day of PL at the beginning of the year, and then we expect teachers to just be able to adopt an entire framework and change pedagogy and practice in an instant. And so the way that you're tackling one capability at a time with the long view of changing pedagogy, I think, I imagine, and you could speak to this better, it would be quite reassuring for your staff that they're being supported through this implementation.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that's the thing, like, we've got teachers collaborating, and some teachers who have openly said they like to work individually, but they're now, particularly our 7 to 9 program, I think that's probably the most exciting work. We've got a teacher who's focuses on digital literacy, and that's a big thing for us. We've got Illumination Lab, but it's using those tools through there, but working with our creative arts teacher, and the students being able to choose basically who they want to work with to develop the capabilities. And that's really exciting, and to see the joy in the teachers and what they're doing. I think that's the thing, the bringing the joy into teaching as well. So and it is, and like I said, we're providing time, providing professional learning, chances to reflect, getting some critical feedback, and and looking at how we're going to celebrate that success when these units of work that we planned in term 1 at the PL to now being able to deliver them this term, and then celebrate that with our community as well. So yeah, like I said, we're pretty excited about what's happening.
Yeah, that's great. Donna, I want to throw to you, because obviously Margaret's working within a school context. And what's really interesting is obviously the work that you've led within your individual school context and the journey that's been there. But You're also one of 8 schools within the Enable cluster in Logan City that's actually taking a look at a regional approach to building this capacity over the last few years. And those 8 schools have been engaging in professional learning around target capabilities each year. And then those teams are kind of taking it back to their school context to build momentum within those. So I'd love for you to talk a little bit more about, your own journey, I think, through this work, but then also looking at how we scale this work across systems of schools too.
Yeah, sure. So thank you very much for having us here today. Yeah, look, I work at Beenleigh State High School. It's in Logan in southeast Queensland. We're a low socioeconomic school. I've worked there for 10 years, and historically we noted that 70% of our students opt to go into the workforce straight after school. And in Queensland, the Queensland Certificate of Education and the Senior Statement, it doesn't really outline those 21st century skills, employability skills that will enable them to merge really well and transition well into the workplace. So back in 2019, I started working with Melbourne University to basically set up a learner profile. We actually did a learning progression at that point in time, and we focused on collaboration, communication, critical thinking, and digital literacies. The reason being, we did, again, looked at all the frameworks. So it was QCAA's 21st century skills were ensconced within our senior syllabuses. We looked at the general capabilities. We looked at OECD's 2030 future workforce, combined all of that, but more importantly, we actually surveyed our local employers and basically came up with those 4 capabilities. So hence we then did the learner profile. And since 2019, we've actually been actively reporting and assessing on what they call complex competencies along those capability lines. We were actually getting a lot of success with that in terms of, our students transitioning well into the workplace. So coming into 24, we decided, well, let's pitch this to 7 other schools within Logan. And we applied for a Schools Plus grant. $200,000 later, we managed to employ Future Anything last year, this year and into next year. So that program, we chose to do collaboration and communication last year, focusing on critical thinking and creativity this year. And we'll probably shift that focus next year based on the Future Anything framework now, and look at probably curiosity moving into next year. So in terms of the 8 schools now coming together across that 3-year period, so we're 18 months into that, what we're finding is it is a brilliant vehicle for the schools to network and learn from each other. So we've set up within Beenleigh over the last 6 years, we've got many structures in place we've built a Beenleigh board, which all our pedagogies go on, again, trying to engage our students. Everybody listening today knows that the students do all across Australia, across the world, they do well prep into grade 8, then it dips, grade 9, grade 10, even lower, and then they pop back up in 11 and 12. So our whole aim is to try and engage those students, 8, 9, particularly 8, 9 and 10, and see them through into 11 and 12, and then transition them successfully into the workplace or further study, whatever it might be. And that's what we're finding, that we set up these structures, we get our teachers to really start sharing high yield strategies that will engage our students. And so now we've got 8 schools that are actually setting up those structures to engage basically students.
Yeah, that's great. And I think, Donna, what's really interesting about that is like the power of, and Margaret, you've found the same thing, I think, as well, is that the power of community and being able to have other schools to bounce off and learn from, I think, in this work, because, although school contexts are unique, no 2 school contexts are the same. I think when we break it down, we're often facing the same barriers and blockers to engagement and also enjoyment, I think, in education. And so being able to share what works and what doesn't, I think, creates ecosystems that support each other through this work as well.
Absolutely. And the other added value of this is that quite often we leave at our middle leaders in this, and they're the ones that are really critical. Like as a deputy, the principal, yes, we are the ultimate instructional leaders in a school, but ultimately it comes down to those middle leaders. If we don't onboard them, then we're not going to get to the coalface with our teachers. And we found that really important to make sure we're upskilling. And this is what Future Anything, and we also work with Griffith University on this project. You're actually bringing in to our middle leaders, making sure they're connecting, but making sure we're upskilling them and what's important to push this project forward.
Yeah, I think that's great. I want to dig in and just respond to a couple of questions and definitely allow you guys to feed into these questions as well. So Donna's question is a great one. So how do we manage this with national curriculum compliance? It's always the first question off the bat. I'll answer first and then I'll throw to my experts to talk about how it functions within their school context. What we've found with this work is that the capability development is complementary to the content in the curriculum. And so if you imagine a student experience within an individual term, some of these capabilities are considered levers for success within that curriculum area. And so when we do work with schools, we recommend that you target one capability per unit of curriculum. So within 10 weeks, you wouldn't teach all 6. You would actually look at the 6 capabilities and go, which capability is most intrinsically linked to the success of my young people within the learning experience that they're about to embark on. And therefore, when you build these capabilities within that 10-week journey, they're actually contributing to the overall success of the young person within the content of the curriculum that you're working in. So you wouldn't choose creative thinking if creative thinking isn't linked to that particular unit. You might choose critical thinking instead or curiosity instead. And so therefore, they don't become bolt-on, but they're actually bolted in to the success of the curriculum unit. Again, I just want to reiterate, you cannot teach all 6 capabilities at once. You can definitely touch on 6 capabilities within a unit of curriculum, and you can get implicit growth across all the capabilities. However, this real work when it happens explicitly is in targeting a capability and then explicitly focusing in on that within a unit of curriculum. Margaret, how would you add to that question, I guess, around the balance of compliance and then also this capability work?
Yeah, I think that's really true because, like I said, we had some really targeted programs we were doing around inquiry and capabilities across the school, but the aim was always to have it across all curriculum areas. So I think that's been the key thing about our work this year is we're just focusing on the one capability on curiosity. And obviously, like I said, the curriculum is, we have to teach the curriculum, but it's using those capabilities to teach the curriculum. And that's been the most exciting work this year because every teacher, we have 15 full-time equivalents, so we're not talking huge, but leadership team of 3, but it's all curriculum areas are focusing on the capability. They could choose whichever area they want to work on, but to develop it in their unit of work. So, and I think it's exactly right, not tackling too much at a time. It's just focusing on what fits best. Again, context is so important.
Yeah, absolutely. Donna, I'm going to go to the next question because I'd really love for your reflection on this. So Claudette said, I would love to see an example of capabilities being implemented. Who does it and how? You say 10 minutes a week. Is it in all KLOs or one? Who collects the data and analyzes? First thing I would say is all schools do it differently, and that's the nature of schools. So I would say in all our work that we do with our partner schools, there's different approaches each way. So in the case of Ardrossan, curiosity is the target capability for this year. And so the work is around building the capacity of teachers to embed curiosity through inciting incidents in every piece of curriculum that they're delivering across the year. Some schools that we work with stack the capabilities in year levels. So for example, year 7 might be curiosity, year 8 might be creative thinking, year 9 might be critical thinking, year 10 might be communication, year 11 might be action and agility, or sometimes we bucket, and this goes down into prep too. So prep or reception and prep year 1, year 2 might be curiosity, and then you might do, creative thinking and critical thinking. So there might be year level focuses. There might be, I am reluctant to recommend subject specific delivery of capabilities because I think what we get is faculties running in silo, particularly in a secondary space where communication is the responsibility of the English department, and then critical thinking is the responsibility of the science department, and they're not integrated in a transferable way, which is the intention of the capabilities. As far as the collecting of the data and the analysis, the best way to do this is set up, again, I would say starting the capabilities first and building in the impact of measurement, but having young people engage in a common measurement tool at the beginning of the year that's centrally available within a dashboard. And then young people do the post-program at the end of a year so that you can see growth, and they would engage with different capabilities at different times throughout the year. So thinking about dashboards and learner profiles And then some schools, which is I'll cue into Donna in a second, also use things like digital badging and micro-credentialing to evidence this work for students as well. So Donna, do you want to speak about Beanly? Because you're a little bit further along the journey and you've definitely got a few different platforms that you use to evidence this and make it, I guess, accessible for teachers and students.
Absolutely. So the learning progression that we built basically with Melbourne University, we still operate in that space many years down the track. So it's a learning progression. Our students actually go through the process of grading themselves, but then the teachers do as well. And then moving right through, so they are very au fait with that learning progression. They also have a learner profile, and that is actually part of their learner profile right from grade 7 right through to the end of grade 12. So when they're exiting at grade 12 level, effectively our grade 12 teachers come together, they look at that learning progression, they're on a scale, and we just go bronze through to platinum on a scale of 4 different levels. This teachers then, it's no different to as you're exiting your grade 12s and getting them prepared for their senior statement, their ATAR, whatever, the teachers come together, they moderate the students in terms of where they sit on that learning progression, and then it becomes part of their learner profile, which is the reporting aspect of the capabilities. But what we also have done is we work with Credly, and we actually digitally badge our capabilities. The reason being it's just really nice and easy for when a student goes to an interview, they can basically open their phone, there are their capabilities around collaboration, and they can easily talk through why a teacher has given them a platinum on collaboration as they step into the workplace.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you. And look, I think what Donna and Margaret have both highlighted, and just to dig in, I think to what you, Donna O'Connor, sorry, we're double naming, it's going to get very confusing. What Donna Harvey, and also echoing Donna, your reflection down there, is the work has to be, I think, again, can I just linchpin or like maybe put a little asterisk over the top of this? It is also about, this is our philosophy of the way that we approach capability. So please see this through the lens of how I see education, which is that we want to put young people in the driver's seat, particularly around capabilities, because they need to wield them in the context of the real world. And so if this is more burdensome for teachers, we're doing this the wrong way. Because really this needs to be something that we're doing with and for young people, not to young people in the classroom. And so as much as it's a school leadership perspective to set up the infrastructure that supports the work in the classroom, once things like these dashboards and learner profiles and measurement and evaluation tools and cool posters that show the capabilities, like once you've got that infrastructure, this shouldn't be arduous for teachers to implement in the classroom. If it becomes another evaluation and reporting line, it's not sustainable. Teachers are too time poor. We barely have the time to provide feedback on the levels of reporting that we have currently. It has to be something that teachers can do easily. So in the schools that we're working with, there's a commitment to ongoing professional development. Okay. And so a school like Ardrossan that we're working closely with, there's a commitment from leadership to ongoing professional development. But our expectation is that this is woven within the fabric of teaching and learning that's already happening. Because if it's not easy and if it doesn't feel like a win, it's very hard to continue with that as well. Natasha, great question. I just want to name the fact that we are so woefully over time, but I did kind of tell you all that we would be over time. So if you're still here, you kind of knew it. I'm happy to wrap up. I'll answer this question, but I also, if the questions keep coming, unfortunately, it's likely I'm just going to keep answering them. So if you can just start heating up your dinner in the background, we can just continue on in this journey for the next 2 hours. No, I promise. I'll wrap really, really soon. But do feel free to throw the questions in here, because I think what we can do is follow up with additional resourcing should we not be able to get to those questions. Great question, Natasha, has then been parent feedback on the student learner profile. One thing that I would just say that kind of supersedes this conversation is that we often get this barrier of blocker from our partner schools who are like, oh, you know, as a teaching group, we've drunk the Kool-Aid on the importance of capabilities, but our parents are still pushing ATAR. And so some of the work that we're doing in these multi-year partnerships with schools is actually doing targeted parent engagement or caregiver engagement nights where we actually communicate back this future of work research. And we start to do a night around, well, what is curiosity? What is creative thinking? How does it show up at school? How does it show up at home? How does it show up in industry? Because if we don't actually communicate this back to our parent caregiver community, then they're not going to find the value in that work. So I think that's really, really important. And I know some of our schools young people bring their capability profiles to their parent-teacher interviews, and that's considered an important part of sharing and showcasing learning just as much as what their academic profiles might be. Anything to add on that, Margaret and Donna, in your stakeholder engagement or community engagement or that parent buy-in piece?
I think that's the thing we're still looking at, is how we are tracking the capabilities, and we have done some work with the Melbourne Metrics over the last couple of years as well, but didn't go down the Ruby path because basically we wanted it to be brought across everybody to be able to track it. So I think that's the next stage for us, and the things we're talking about, how we're going to share that learning with parents. So we're talking about a Curiosity showcase and things like that, but we're still working on what that learner profile might look like for us, but haven't really developed it yet.
Yeah, cool.
Look, as for being Lee, we actually do, like on our teacher parent interview nights, we have our learner profile. That's part of the process that teachers talk through with students, but being in a low socioeconomic area, we don't have a lot of parents turn up, I'm afraid. So what we've done, yeah, sadly, so what we've done—
Work in progress.
Yeah. I don't know, but in Queensland, in grade 10, every student must have a student education and training plan for entry into grade 11 and 12. We've just done ours today, actually, for next year, semester 2 and into next year. So every parent must come. If your child is going to be at Beenleigh in grade 11, you have to come for that meeting. That's when we hit them up and we start to get all of our parents. There's other siblings. That's when we get them on board to understand what that learner profile means and how they can use that to actually help track their students' progress from 7 to 12.
Yeah, awesome. And I think, look, this is a massive change. I think we're talking about industrial model of education where learning content and regurgitating it back for assessment was the way that you secured your post-secondary pathway. And I don't want to go down this rabbit hole, but what we're seeing is changes in the tertiary institutions that are pushing down the changes that we're seeing in the senior schooling pathways. So with direct entry, the value of certs and diplomas, changing the requirements for young people to engage in or how they get into tertiary pathways. This is where these portfolio assessments or this portfolio approach is actually having more and more value, I think, with securing that. And as we build this narrative, we're going to get buy-in from parents, but we have to do it deliberately. And the little asterisk that I would put on this is, if you're a school leader and all of your front-facing comms on your social media is about NAPLAN and ATAR, you're never going to get buy-in from your parents on the value of capabilities, because all they're seeing is you sing the praises of these external assessments. They can't reconcile the importance of capabilities if you're also not front-loading the importance of that. So what it looks like from a school-based, social media, what we're celebrating goes a very long way, I think, to stop signaling to parents and caregivers what we value here and how we do it. So I'm super conscious of time. Joanne, I could nerd out on your question about new metrics. I wonder how deep in this rabbit hole we could go. I'll answer it briefly and I'm happy to go deeper. There are some amazing frameworks that exist out there, and New Metrics has one of the most beautiful pieces of research in the entire world with their complex competencies. I think one of the challenges that we found with our partner schools is the complexity of implementation makes it difficult for schools that may not have the resourcing on the ground to run out the whole gamut of what that looks like. And so I guess some of the differences are we've tried to build, a more streamlined, simplified capability framework that with a really strong implementation or strategy for teachers. So Melbourne New Metrics have this beautiful WOT. I would say our focus as a company has always been on what does this look like on the ground in classrooms. And so we've spent a lot of time proofing the implementation of capabilities within core curriculum. And so that's one of the changes. I think the other significant change is that ours is obviously based on the confidence of young people in these capabilities and not based on teacher assessment of the capabilities, because it's more of that student in the driver's seat. And so our framework will never go down the path of teacher assessment of capabilities. If that's your jam, we're not the partner for you. We're always going to be driving a student-led approach and student portfolio, student showcase and sharing. So there's merits to both, I think. It just probably depends on the pathway that you want to follow with the capability development that you're doing within your school. But beautiful research, lovely work, decades old stuff that's sitting behind it of great value, and are I think just like SACE, kind of setting the, making this work accessible and a conversation for schools, I think nationally and globally. So really important stuff, I think. All right, I need to stop. We have to stop. So please, this is my favorite topic in the world. If you have any questions, please reach out. I'm going to ask Donna and Margaret really quickly, given your experience in this, if you could send teachers down a rabbit hole, a resource, a reading, a place to look or watch or read, what would be the resource that you would send people to? Donna, I'll shoot to you first.
Oh, please, no. I think Margaret wants to answer first. I'm still thinking.
I don't know.
Margaret.
Nicole looked at my bookcase when she was over here in Ardrossan, but I thought she was looking at my little ducks, not my books, but that's okay. I don't know. I think reading your blogs are really good, Nick, to be really honest. And that's what we've actually have all our staff doing at the moment, just saying is a really good, again, easy to read resource. So I'm going to give that a plug because I think that's a really good resource to look at.
Thanks, Margaret. That was kind. I did not tee that up before the session, just to
No,
be
you
clear. Donna, over to you.
Look, I honestly just think at the moment we're just absorbing anything we can find in middle leadership, to be honest with you, and have that drive the whole school approach, up and down.
Yeah, awesome. I just want to say thanks to Margaret and Donna for being candid. You can find them both on LinkedIn. They love this stuff as much as I do. Please look at the work that they're both leading. Beenleigh was the first school I did prac at. As a beginning teacher, I grew up in Logan, and Beenleigh was the first place I cut my teeth at the front of the room. And, you know, I'm a big fan of the work that Margaret's leading at Ardrossan. It's such a beautiful community. And so I know they would relish the opportunity to share notes with leaders who'd like to understand a little bit more of their learnings and also where they're going next. If you have any questions, please reach out. What we will do is send this recording and a whole bucket of notes out to everyone. But as ever, please just hit reply if you've got a curly question, because we're very happy to chat. We've gone 16 minutes over. For those of you that have hung around, legends, gold stars for all of you. You can stay forever. I'm going to click off the recording and send you on your way for a great night. But if you do have a question you'd like to ask off the recording, I'll hang around for a few minutes and I'm happy to dig deeper into anything that might be left afterwards. But thanks for joining us today for Live Learning, and stay tuned for the next one as well. Thanks, everyone. Thanks.